So remember when I said I would come back to analog horror when something big happened in one of the series that I've already covered? Well, that finally happened. See, two of the biggest videos on this channel are about UrbanSpook, by far one of the most controversial. It was notorious for its edgy style that felt like it was directly ripped out of the world of stuff like Jeff the Killer and the Tales Dolls Curse with its level of angst. But what made the series stand out in the first place was the artwork, as it was genuinely fantastic to look at. It was done in a way that was truly mysterious, as you wondered what could have possibly happened to these people, and the names of these paintings gave a small hint of what their fate most likely was, but not really enough to fully figure out what was going on. But there was just so much surrounding nothingness that it made the series feel like a slog to get through and took away from the general feelings that these paintings were able to evoke. One part I would always point to with just how over the top it was is just how excessive the violence is within the series. It's extreme and unbelievable and reads like something an edgelord would write in order to try and shock someone, because it's just so excessive. However, what I did point out in my last video on the subject was that the series was seemingly starting to move in the right direction. For example, in the episode Family, there was this phone call which I found to be genuinely upsetting and pretty unsettling. There was just some level of raw brutality to it that made it somewhat effective, so I did have some hope that the series could potentially get better. And while the rest of the episode was more of the same, it at least hinted to the potential that UrbanSpook had with the series, because if he was able to build a moment like that, he could surely do something more with it. However, the next episode after that, Meat went back to the same over-the-top edgy style from before and completely baffled me with his decision-making process. Because even though he was still getting excessive criticism for his over-the-top edginess, which people rightfully pointed out, he instead just doubled down, and it was extremely bizarre to me. However, the next episode after that, Hell, once again gave some hope to the series. Besides the opening half being the same over-the-top edginess with no other substance than the paintings, the second half with the police investigation was genuinely interesting to watch and extremely well done. That's why I explained in my review that even though I gave it a 3 out of 10, that section definitely has a higher score. The rest of it just drags it down watchability wise. However, with this episode, a pattern began to emerge with UrbanSpook, as it seemed that the main thing that drew people into the series in the first place was actually to its detriment. While he would take risks on a small section of the video, he would keep the rest of the video the same, rendering the rest of the episode feeling pointless. And after a while, the charm of the painting started to wear off, as it became clear that UrbanSpook was becoming a sort of one-trick pony. However, despite all of this, I am still holding out a small amount of hope for this very last episode, as it seemed like UrbanSpook might try to push it a bit more due to just how long it has been between the two uploads. I mean, I know this video is a little late, but it still was nearly a year since the very last one. I'm writing this before watching it, so good luck for me, I guess. Well, let's get right into it. Oh boy, well, this was just a horrific mess. This quite possibly is one of the worst endings in any series to date, and I was surprised by just how much he missed the mark here. I expected some edginess, as I mean, come on, that's the norm for this series. But the level here was just so insane that I couldn't help but laugh at just how dumb it was. If you thought the episode before gave some hope of Urban showing some level of quality, he completely dashes it here with a horrifically boring and abrasive ending. Let's look through the episode, shall we? In this episode, Mona gives an interview after being arrested for the past episode. In the interview, she details the killings from her perspective, as we hear the full extent of the massacres that she committed. In this, we get a bit more of a supernatural perspective, as it seems like Mona's motivations were a bit more ritualistic. However, after the interview, they then explain that Mona was killed in prison by another inmate. After this, tons more paintings are found, with hundreds going missing, revealing that Mona was actually a demon and is now going on a mass killing spree across the US due to her finally being free from her mortal form. It then goes into a 5-minute compilation of a bunch of new paintings that were found, with loud heavy metal music playing in the background in a way that almost reminded me of Funny Games, in that it was such a utterly bizarre decision. And while for Funny Games this helps set the tone, in this it just feels like a complete slog to get through. And that is how I would characterize this episode and the series as a whole. Boring. It's just so fucking boring. I'm tired of trying to make some sort of excuse for UrbanSpook, but this series is just not good at all. All moments of this feel like they are being made out of spite to the viewer rather than to just draw them in, because not one aspect of this episode works. Urban has got to know his strengths by now, but instead just decides to revel in all of the worst aspects of his series. In fact, this episode is so bad that in retrospect it completely dismantles all the goodwill that I had towards the series in the first place. Like, this episode is bad. It's not done in a way that actually leaves the viewers thinking about what they watched, a la Funny Games, which Urban clearly has some inspiration from, but instead just in a way that was insulting to our time. I know that Urban has said that the episode was purposely bad, and yeah, it's extremely obvious that was the case. But just because it was purposely bad doesn't just fucking excuse how bad it is, especially when you compare it to the rest of the series up to this point. Intentionally bad art is still bad art, especially when it undercuts everything that made the series compelling in the first place. Compare this to the episodes before, as while they had issues, they still seemed like they had some genuine care and craft actually put into them. So I don't exactly buy his story of it being planned as bad from the beginning, because it just doesn't align with what we saw beforehand from him. He just seems to revel in every single aspect that he was criticized for. For example, the edginess of this episode is through the roof. The stuff that Mona discusses in the interview is so over the top and corny that it literally feels like something I would read in the Creepypasta wiki back in the 2010s. Like, it's trying so hard to be edgy that in the end it just comes across as being funny, as it's so unbelievably insane that it just is unthinkable in your mind. Secondly, the paintings feel even drier than ever, as they are quite literally the only scare tactic in this entire episode. This episode is just Urban doing the exact same thing again, and it's horrendous to sit through. The artwork doesn't hold any weight anymore, and instead just leaves the viewer feeling dissatisfied. And while I can understand the decision behind the music, as it could make the experience disorienting, however, the paintings have lost all meaning behind them, instead just feeling completely hollow and completely useless in the process. In turn, this invalidates any of the emotional dissonance caused by the music, instead just causing the entire sequence to fall flat. No innovation, no new scares, just more of the same. It is the complete inverse of what this series was leading up to this point, and while it was intentionally uninteresting, it didn't do so in a way that actually left any meaning. In each episode, it seemed like Urban at least would try one thing somewhat new, and in this one, he instead just doubles down on all the worst aspects. His public stance towards the medium and criticism seems reflected in the way this finale was constructed, and it's abundantly obvious. From the very beginning, he has said that the series was just a showcase for his art, and while I understand that decision process, it still doesn't mean that's a good idea. I've given this series chance after chance because I genuinely believe there's potential here. That's why this ending is so disappointing. I think the last time I've had such a negative feeling around a series was with the Batman analog horror. However, even that one obviously was made with some care and tried to slightly respect the medium. Don't get me wrong, as while it fundamentally failed at many of the things that it attempted, it was still obvious that effort was put into it. The creator's refusal to engage meaningfully with criticism has led to creative stagnation, and the finale is the clearest example of that stagnation. Rather than refining the pacing, expanding the investigation angle, or evolving the format, the finale leans even harder into the static painting montage and shock value, which were already the weakest parts of the series before. The fundamental disconnect between the creator's mindset and audience expectation is why the series collapsed in the first place. It's truly baffling to me to see something with so much potential just to get completely squandered by any lack of effort. It's a series that leaves me frustrated, but not in a way that's impressive, but more so just in what could have came out of the truly interesting concept. And that's not even getting into the supernatural elements that were added into this episode, and it truly makes me just ask why. What possible reason could they have thought that adding this to the series would be a good idea, as it just doesn't fit whatsoever into what had been set up before. It didn't make the series more interesting, it doesn't make it more frightening. In actuality, it just doesn't really do anything. The idea is truly pointless and doesn't fit tonally or atmospherically at all to anything else in the series. The decision is just so bizarre and makes me question what even the point of the episode was. It makes me think that honestly it might have been better if the series had just ended with the last episode, because this episode was just completely pointless. And it should be abundantly clear by now what the score of this episode is, but if you haven't guessed, it gets a 0 out of 10. This is only my second 0 out of 10 on any episode for any series this far, with the only other one being the Batman analog horror. I think this is a fair score, as it fundamentally fails at nearly every aspect that made the series worthwhile in the first place. It actively drags down the rest of it and has got to be one of the least graceful endings I've seen in a while. And with the context of the series as a whole, I can finally now give my series rating as well, as this is going to be a 1 out of 10. While moments of the series still shine through, the story fails fundamentally. The parts of it that work feel accidental channel due to just how much the rest of it is just completely uninteresting. So because of that, it gets a 1 out of 10, mainly due to the obvious skill that UrbanSpook has with his paintings and the occasional moments that still shine through, but that's quite literally all the positives that I can say. At the end of the day, this is why the series fails. Not because it's controversial, not because it's edgy, not even because it's extreme. It fails because it refuses to evolve. I've covered UrbanSpook from the beginning. I pointed out where it worked. I've defended the moments that genuinely showed promise. And every time it felt like it might grow into something sharper, something more intentional, something more interesting, and instead just doubles down though on the same weaknesses. The investigation angle showed there was potential. The atmosphere in certain scenes proved that he could build tension, but when the strongest parts of a series feel accidental and the weakest parts become the focus, that's not bold. That's stagnation. If the finale was meant to be intentionally abrasive or purposely bad, that doesn't make it clever, it just makes it empty. Art that rejects its audience still has something to say. This doesn't. It just repeats itself louder and louder, and that's the most frustrating part. There was something here. There was a genuinely interesting concept buried under all of it. But instead of refining it, expanding it, or respecting the medium it exists in, the series collapsed under its own refusal to grow. And that's why it ends with no impact, but with disappointment. And I'm sorry that my first analog horror review in a while is so extremely negative. I've been trying to focus on things that I actually enjoy talking about the past few months, but the series is just so fundamentally linked with this channel at this point that I knew I had to cover it. And with all that being said, make sure if you haven't already to like and subscribe to the channel, and make sure to comment on whether you agree or disagree down below. I assume this video is going to be somewhat in the middle, because I know some people didn't mind the ending, but for me, I just found this completely atrocious. I didn't enjoy any moment of it, but let me know down below what you really think of it. And this has been ABA Short Films, and I'll see you all soon.